Welcome to the Indian Gaming Association's The New Normal webcast. My name is Lisa Johnson. I'm the conference manager for the Indian Gaming Trade Show and Convention. I'd like to share a few housekeeping tips before we get started. Everyone is muted by default except for our speakers. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the chat box and they'll be brought up at the end. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Victor Rocha, conference chairman of the Indian Gaming Association.
Thank you, Lisa. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to The New Normal, your go-to source for insightful discussions on the gaming industry and critical issues impacting Native American tribes across the United States. I'm Victor Rocha, and joining me is my co-host, Jason Giles, Executive Director of the Indian Game Association. Good morning, Jason.
Morning.
Tomorrow, the U.S. Commodity Futures Trading Commission, the CFTC, is hosting a closed conference call with tribal leaders to discuss the rise of federally regulated prediction markets, and specifically Kalshi. Joining us for this important conversation are Chairman Rodney Butler of the Mashantucket Pequot Indian Nation. Good morning, Chairman. Joe Webster, Managing Partner at Hobbs, Straus, Dean Walker, and Bradley Bledsoe Downes, attorney at Bledsoe Downes PC. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Bradley and Joe. Joe, we're going to start to put you on the masthead now. That seems to be a regular. Thank you so much. And Brad, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate to have your insights. And Chairman, so let's start from the beginning. So what is the significance of this Thursday's calls, and why should tribal leaders be paying attention?
Well, first of all, we're not quite sure what to expect from tomorrow's call. I mean, we were scheduled for April 30th, as many of you know, and that was abruptly canceled without much information as to why. I think we can assume that many of us were going to be heading into DC and expressing our concerns with where this was headed. And the CFTC probably didn't want to hear that in person. And so, but we're appreciative that they're willing to spend the time to meet with us virtually. And I think, look, we don't know where it's going to go, but the importance of it is that we need to make it very, very clear the potential, not the potential, the real impact that these predictions markets operations will have on not just our travel gaming operations, but commercial gaming operations and, IGRA approved and state approved agreements that we've worked on for decades and that service our communities. And so it's a serious threat, and the CFTC needs to understand that and understand our concerns, and obviously all the legal concerns around it, notwithstanding.
Jason, welcome this morning. I mean, where's IGA's position on this?
Well, for starters, arguably, there's a much more important meeting coming up on June 10th at Chairman Butler's reservation there at the Foxwood Casino during NCAI's mid-year. June 10th at 4:15 p.m., we're going to hold a big CFTC, our own roundtable, and we're really going to get the information out there to tribal leaders and industry leaders. And we're going to invite industry leaders as well to come to Foxwoods during NCAI so we can really break down the threat that this is to Indian country. And, this all started from our friend Joe Webster on February 8th, because I just pulled up the email and sent it to someone else when he forwarded me this very innocuous looking announcement by acting chairperson Caroline Pham that, they were going to allow prediction markets and regulate prediction markets under the CFTC's authority for commodities, futures, and trading. So, in that announcement, to go out of your way to bash the previous administration, okay, we're used to that from Trump people. But, to just blanketly say this is innovation, as you were alluding to, Victor, this is innovation and CFTC can't be handcuffed by lack of innovation and I guess lack of outside the box thinking, we're going to allow these to move forward. There's been no analysis, even from some of these district court judges, on what any of this means. Zero analysis from anyone within the CFTC, not even their own attorneys, about how this would work, how it's going to be regulated. No analysis about why this preempts state and tribal gaming regulation, which has been under the purview of states and tribes for well over 50 years at this point. and also zero analysis of the conflict with the Wire Act and the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act. It's the more you read the materials that are coming out about this, I read them every day now, just about, and we're looping in tribal game commissioners, so I have to repeat a lot of this stuff over and over. And it's really making me mental because none of this makes sense. And I don't, and people ask good questions, and I don't know how they're getting away with this. No, there was no rulemaking by the CFTC. No, there was never anything published about what are the rules for betting on when the Alaska volcano, if it's going to erupt before July 1st or not. I don't know. Are there coaches and players out there submitting their own contracts, essentially betting on themselves and their teams? Nobody knows. But you can see how this can easily get out of control quickly. I mean, are there going to be, everyone just likes to joke and say, are there going to be death pools? Well, there have been death pools. There were contracts you could take out on when the Pope was going to pass away. And so this whole thing just gets so nutty. And I doubt that we'll hear anything from the CFTC tomorrow about their justification for allowing this under commodities, which we think of as soybeans and corn, pork bellies, orange juice. Everyone, the best line, someone said, we need to go back and watch Trading Places. And I was just like, yeah, might as well. It makes as much sense as anything to get an understanding of this Commodities Futures and Trading Commission. Because that's my biggest hurdle right now is having to explain to people, well, what is the CFTC? What do they do? Let alone trying to explain a futures contracts on a crop and how that relates to betting on a sports game tonight or betting on someone's personal statistics later down in the year. Or, again, just betting on whether there will be no tax for tips in Trump's big, beautiful bill. If you can imagine betting on something as stupid as that. But the funny thing is, right, Victor, Kalshi is double downing on this and they signing marketing agreements with influencers, one of whom says in the advertisement, I love Kalshi because it allows me to bet on stupid things. I mean, that's their business model at this point. And a federal agency is willing to go along with this.
So well, Jason, you but you bring it right back to a valid point and puts it back in Joe and Brad's wheelhouse. Is that I think the only way this is going to go, is be settled is through the courts. You know what I mean? There's just no way around it. If they're gonna Lebensraum, is that what that's the old term they use for growing space that they're gonna need, right? I think that's what we're looking at. You know what I mean? So,
if you can give us, quick update because we've had the 3 states that have sued, Nevada, New Jersey, and Maryland, and at least preliminarily, the gaming commissions in Nevada and New Jersey were dealt a little bit of a setback. But where is this going to go? And to Victor's point, I mean, Congress is going to be tied up with this budget until August, and then they have to delve right into next year's budget. And when we talk to Senator Grassley and some other folks and their staffs, they have no clue what's going on. The Nevada delegation does. Nevada delegation's on it, but we've got a lot of work to do in Congress, and right now the courts are already dealing with this. So maybe an update, Joe, where all that stands.
Sure. Yeah. Well, thanks, Jason, Victor. I think in terms of the litigation, there's not a lot that's new, maybe since the last discussion that we had. You've got 4 cases that are pending right now. And all of the cases were brought by either Kalshi or Crypto.com. And these were in response to enforcement actions, as Jason said, brought by the state regulators. A big problem in all of the cases so far is there hasn't been a tribal voice. Even though this has such a dramatic and direct impact on Indian country, all of the cases involve private companies, Kalshi and Crypto.com, and state regulators. There's no tribal parties. There haven't been any tribal amicus briefs so far. So to the extent that IGRA has been discussed, it's been discussed by other parties and not tribes. And I think that's been a problem. Encouraging sign is even some of these other the commercial operators are recognizing that IGRA is a factor, and they are now presenting that in briefs that have been filed. Maryland, brought it up in theirs, but I think that's only a start. In Nevada, the Nevada Resorts Association filed a emergency motion to intervene in the case, and that's as far as I know, the first outside group that has tried to intervene in one of these cases. That motion is pending. Separately, in New Jersey, in that federal case, the Casino Association in Atlantic City filed a motion for leave to file an amicus brief, which was granted. But that's, again, just as amicus, a friend of the court, as opposed to being a party in the case. So all of these cases, for the most part, are it's still early stages where, as Jason said, there are a couple negative decisions, but those were based on motions for preliminary injunctive relief. There haven't been full decisions on the merits by any of the courts yet. The case that's probably the farthest along is the case coming out of New Jersey, where the court issued an order enjoining the New Jersey regulators. That order has now been appealed to the Third Circuit. So that's the first case to reach the appellate level. But even that case, it's going to be sometime, as that's briefed and argued on this, again, an order on a preliminary basis. So, there's a lot that's going on, but still fairly early. Probably the other, significant development to mention, the last couple of weeks is, in addition to the states that have taken enforcement action so far, the latest state to take action is Arizona. Arizona issued a cease and desist letter to Kalshi and these other entities. Not clear yet whether there will be a lawsuit filed against Arizona. With the suits that have been filed, we haven't seen suits against the other states that have issued cease and desist letters, but I think we're all kind of just watching in terms of the possibility for additional litigation.
Wow. Well, Brad, first of all, welcome very much. I mean, there was a lot there, First of all, I think a lot of this is like this, the CFTC, for those of us who don't, it can come out of nowhere as another bureaucratic organization that's coming in to override tribal sovereignty. That's the way we see it from our position. This seems very unusual, Brad. Are there other cases like this that you know of where they just override, where they feel they obviously feel they have they feel emboldened, you know what I mean? But it seems awkward to me,
Well, it's the Commodities Futures Trading Commission is an independent federal agency that is charged with regulating the U.S. derivative markets. And as Jason mentioned, it could be dealing with the future prices of wheat. So let's say a farmer wants to sell 5,000 bushels of wheat at $6.50 a bushel in July. That is regulated by the CFTC. And so when we think about some of the roles that they've had, you can also agree to buy foreign currency or to buy gold or sell gold at a certain price. And that would all be regulated by the CFTC under the Commodities Exchange Act. I don't think anyone ever predicted, and sorry for that pun, that there would be sports betting under the guise of prediction markets. I have the Kalshi website up right now, and I can see I can still bet on the pro men's basketball championship and who would win that. Right now, according to this, there's a 78% chance that Oklahoma City is going to win. Well, that's true, but I could bet on it. And it's I think this is really of concern because there's a process that has been authorized under the statute that allows these registered entities to self-certify that their proposed contract is consistent with the Commodities Exchange Act and satisfies all the regulations. And then there's a short time period where the CFTC that's a 10-day period, could essentially put it on hold and seek to review it and ask them not to go forward with that. The registered entities, after they self-certify, assuming that the contract's not disapproved or asked to be put on hold, can then offer it. And that's what we're seeing, is that there is an emboldened small group right now of registered entities that are trying to have these traded and are being successful in doing that. And then responding in the litigation by saying, because they haven't been disapproved, that the Commodities Exchange Act effectively preempts state law, such that each of these states can't stop their actions. And let's be clear, they can now offer this under that argument if it's successful in all 50 states. You could be at Chairman Butler's casino at Foxwoods, and you could place that bet in the middle of Foxwoods. And we've done that. We've been on various reservations now. We've been able to pull this up. So it is not excluding Indian country. And I think to really put this into perspective, the reports are that for the NCAA basketball tournament, the Super Bowl, and the Masters golf tournament, that there were over $600 million in trading volume that's been reported. So this is not small. Those are just, 3 events. There's baseball ongoing. There's the NBA basketball championship. There's French Open men's tennis winners. All this stuff is out there that is being made available to the public. And it really does upset the carefully negotiated tribal state compacts and of course, state interests in that and tribal interests in those situations. So it's definitely something to be aware of. And at a $600 million over the course of 3 events, you're going to attract more people who want to do this.
But also, isn't this little bureaucratic organization like running on the rims? I mean, they have new officers coming in. They have others that have resigned. What is that going on with this organization, Brad?
Well, as of right now, you have 5 commissioners. All 5 of them have announced their impending resignation, some as early as the end of this month. And you have a nominee for the chairperson that once that person is confirmed, the current acting chair, Carolyn Pham, will also be resigning. So you're going to have a 1-person commission until the other seats are filled by the president.
Isn't that called a star chamber? Isn't that what they call that when it's just 1 person?
Well, Victor, I mean, that's the thing, as Bradley and Joe are pointing out, is, and it's really the only way it starts to make sense if you're just telling somebody about this and why it's happening. And they always eventually get to, well, why are they letting this happen? And you can only just point to the folks that were on the board at Kalshi, one of the companies providing this service, and they've infiltrated the CFTC. And the nominee, Brian Quintens, was on the board at Kalshi, and he'll be having a hearing at the Senate Agricultural Committee at some point. And then of course, Don Trump Jr. was a former board member of Kalshi and is apparently a paid consultant by Kalshi. So that's the only way this makes sense, really, when you start to look at it, about why they've upended 30 years of precedent and started allowing these kinds of bets. But beyond that, Chairman Butler, it's good to hear Arizona's reached out, Joe, because they have tribal state compacts. And that's really what we're trying to forge here is, if the Connecticut AG and the 2 tribes in Connecticut, they have standing and they need to stop this. And it's a violation of their tribal state compacts and IGRA and the Wire Act. So we need some more, that's really what we're trying to do with what we're meeting with at Foxwoods on June 10th, is to get tribes to go to their state governments and start saying, we need to stop this.
Yeah, Jay, no, you're absolutely right. And and I'll add that it's for me, it's fascinating, this conversation at large, and then a comment that you said about how it makes sense, and I think that's a loose term to the point that the individual who's going to be ahead of the CFTC is getting confirmed under the Agriculture Department, right? I mean, that's a problem in itself and just speaks to the lunacy of this. But as this has been unfolding over the last few months, and I'm on every single national tribal board you can think of, and I've been on the conference trail. And
Thank
you
you for your
talk to tribes.
service.
Yeah, thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you for your
But
service.
talking to tribal leaders across the country, they're not even aware
Right.
of this. And so this conversation, what we're going to do at NCI in a couple of weeks, I mean, just that general sense of awareness of this is what's happening and this is the real risk. What I'm finding is that leaders haven't fully grasped it yet, and not because it's hard to understand. It's really simple, right? They're violating our agreements. They're violating our compacts that we've worked very hard for. And I mean, Victor, think about just what happened in the last few years out in California, right? To think that could be all for naught because Kalshi and Robinhood can come in today or not come in today. They are doing it today,
They're there. Yeah.
accepting sports bets in California. I mean, that's hundreds of $1 millions that were thrown down the drain if that's the case. And so it just completely circumvents that government to government relationship. What does IGRA stand for? In our case in Connecticut, the Attorney General and the Department of Consumer Protection are taking a look at it, and will weigh in at some point in time. Obviously, the organizations are asking both the AG and DCP, is what's called in Connecticut, to not weigh in. I think they will eventually, but we need that across the country. And so we have a very lucrative agreement for exclusivity in Connecticut, and many tribes have that throughout the country, that will be impacted or impacted immediately. And I think Brad, you had mentioned it. The numbers that were placed. I remember listening to the CEO of Robinhood. He was talking about his Q1 earnings report, and like half of the contracts they placed were sports betting contracts. It was crazy, right? And 200, they said they collected $200 million in bets just on the NCAA tournament. I mean, these are real numbers and will have an impact on our tribal economies and states' economies. And again, it's just getting the tribal leaders to be aware of that. The few that I've spoken to, again, it's complicated initially, but the simple point is that it's circumventing these agreements, these government to government agreements that we've had in place that have fed and fueled our economies, and our communities. And so it's important for us to speak up and make sure that the CFTC understands our concerns, but more importantly, the administration, and Congress understand our concerns.
Chairman Butler, did you see or read any of the Supreme Court decision yesterday, or to turn back the Oak Flats thing where they rejected it to the lower court? But Gorsuch's opinion on it, his dissent, was pretty powerful. You know what I mean? He's talked about sovereignty and the history of the tribes, and I think if we get it to the Supreme Court, I think that's a place where we could get them to listen to.
Yeah, I mean,
Our
this probably won't be a popular comment, but I actually think when you look at the work of the Supreme Court, when it relates to Indian country, right? I'm putting that caveat. They have shown a level of understanding that prior Supreme Courts haven't shown, in deference towards Indian country. And so you have to note that and respect it when you can. And and I've also had an opportunity to spend some time with the new administration and some of the key leadership. And, surprisingly, I think we all had a really low bar that was set in as far as expectations, but surprisingly, pleasantly, there is this understanding of tribal sovereignty and this growing respect for it within the current administration. So I think there's some room there to work, and make our point, and it will be understood. Now, to Jason's point, there are some other interests involved here that we have to overcome. But ultimately, I think the rule of law stands, and we're in a better place. But it's not going to happen if we just sit on our hands.
What do you think, Jace?
Yeah, Joe, I mean, let's talk a little bit about, what are some of the glaring conflicts with, the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act and the Wire Act, that their actions are, by allowing this to happen, and not to just mention state sovereignty and tribal sovereignty, Can we talk a little bit about those, Joe? Because, someone asked a question on here, is this political corruption? I mean, everyone can lobby and redress their grievances, and it's no different than the oil companies wanting, Interior to open up more lands for drilling. But as Rodney just said, this is a nation of laws, and talk about how some of this conflicts with, in our case, IGRA.
Sure. Well, thanks, Jason. And certainly to maybe highlight what Chairman Butler was talking about in terms of the impact, I think this is one of these examples where it's important to look at what the other side is saying. How are they advertising the product and how are they arguing it?
Mm-hmm.
And this first quote is one that I talked about on the last webinar, but to me it really highlights the stakes here, where Kalshi's position is that IGRA's definition of gaming does not extend to sports event contracts. Then they go on to say, but even if it did, the CEA's exclusive jurisdiction provision would displace any attempt by tribes to regulate those contracts. Rather, if the CFTC has jurisdiction, its power is exclusive. So when you look at the conflict, they're essentially saying, well, we're not, this isn't covered by IGRA, but even if it is, it doesn't matter because we can do it anyway, and there's nothing the tribes can do to stop it. So I think that's, obviously highly troubling. But then in addition, you look at the brief that they filed recently in Maryland, where their argument is they say sports betting is now a ubiquitous nationwide industry. One of the reasons Congress granted the CFTC discretion to engage in public interest review rather than banning gaming contracts outright was to allow the CFTC to account for this kind of evolution. So they're also, on the one hand, saying that this isn't gaming under IGRA, but then they go on to say that because sports betting is now such a ubiquitous industry, that somehow justifies offering these sorts of contracts under the CEA. So I think the bottom line is that there is a conflict between what their position about the scope of the CEA and what IGRA allows, because IGRA is supposed to be exclusive in terms of the regulation of gaming on Indian lands, and I think it's clear that this is gaming. And with respect to the Wire Act, and when you look at the terms in the Wire Act in terms of the transmission of information relating to sports betting, this seems to satisfy all of those requirements. And the arguments that Kalshi makes, it's kind of circular. Well, because it's permitted under the CEA, it doesn't violate the Wire Act. Well, that's not really the question. The question is, if the Wire Act applies, in which we think it does, then is this an activity that's prohibited? So I think there are some glaring conflicts, and as mentioned early on, I think one problem was that, especially the way that this litigation started, and frankly on such accelerated pace, these arguments really weren't made, and certainly weren't made initially to the federal court in Nevada, which was the first court to rule on it. The issue of IGRA and the issue of the Wire Act really weren't presented. And it was, they were trying to argue about other issues in terms of sovereign immunity, the state sovereign immunity, and the CEA, but really never got to these other issues, which I think are absolutely critical in terms of the analysis.
And Bradley, I mean, it's part of it is, I mean, the Nevada Gaming Commission is probably not used to losing very much, or having their, cease and desist letters ignored. It probably caught them off guard a little that they were sued after issuing a cease and desist letter. Some of these gambling regulatory agencies are very powerful within the state. I'd say most of them are, and they're not used to losing in court. So, I mean, how does this, and it kind of knocked us back too, because when Joe first sent this out, it was almost laughable. Like, are they really going to allow us to bet on total nonsense? And lo and behold, it's happening, and here we are in the Nevada court. Again, with very little analysis, just sort of said, yeah, Congress has filled the space here, and Nevada can't regulate these. You talk about that a little bit?
Well, I think it's a function of a couple of different things that are happening. One being that, as I mentioned, that self-certification process, and the self-certification process works for most of what goes before the CFTC and what they regulate. But here it's being abused. And because of the fact that the CFTC has not taken action to ask the registered entities to withdraw it or to disapprove these contracts, it looks like they've effectively been approved by the CFTC, which would presumably mean that they are consistent with federal law, specifically the Commodities Exchange Act, and therefore would be preempted because of the fact that the language of the Commodities Exchange Act would say that states can't regulate these types of contracts that fall under that statute. And so I think that's what you saw as the result in Nevada. And I think Joe can talk a little bit to this, but in each of the pieces of litigation, Nevada, New Jersey, Maryland, I think you're starting to see a more well-rounded discussion and getting into more of the nuances of the Commodities Exchange Act. And I think the Maryland litigation probably has learned from Nevada and New Jersey and is really concentrating much more on what the Commodities Exchange Act allows and whether these types of contracts fall within the exclusive jurisdiction of the CFTC. And in this case, I think the Maryland case has really moved forward. And now I think we're starting to look at what are next steps. Is it a tribal regulatory body issuing a cease and desist order? Is it somebody taking another action, whether it be a tribe going against the CFTC, whether it be a state and tribe potentially partnering, as maybe Chairman Butler was alluding to. And I think in Arizona that you mentioned, whether they do or don't get sued, I don't know. But we just had a renegotiated tribal state compact in April of 2021. And we had some unique circumstances that allowed for sports betting. The professional leagues have an interest in it. The tribes have an interest in it, where those groups have 10 licenses each. And so there's obviously money coming into the state. There's tribes that are operating. And this prediction market is now upsetting how that's going to work. But I think we're going to see the development of this over time through pieces of litigation, learning from each one. And as Joe mentioned, as we move forward, we're only in the preliminary stages of these pieces of litigation. So I think when we get the full development of this, I think we'll see different outcomes.
Chairman Butler.
Jay, Victor, I'm sorry, just really quick, based on what Brad just said, to me, that's one of the most fascinating components of this. There are so many players in this, so many constituents, the sports league, the states, the tribes, commercial operators. Why everyone isn't up in arms based on what we've had to go through, right? The legal gymnastics that we've all done to get into these agreements and compacts and negotiations with the state and Interior and others, and that this through this loophole, someone can come in and just usurp all that and just come into our markets, put our agreements at risk. We have leverage in a state like Connecticut because we have exclusivity, and we're sending between us and Mohegan, we're sending a couple $100 million to the state of Connecticut, and we say, look, if you're going to allow this, we're not going to pay you for that exclusivity, right? Not everybody has that ability to do that. But at minimum, everyone should be just screaming from the mountaintops on this one that we have to do something. We have to come together collectively and just talk about the rule of law. Talk about it. And again, this administration supports states' rights, but this is completely throwing that out the window, right? And again, I keep going back to California and a state like Texas that's been in play for a decade plus with gaming and sports betting, and that's what they've decided they didn't want to do. Well, now they don't have a choice. Right? States' rights don't matter anymore. And so you can't have it both ways when it benefits just because it benefits some individuals that or you want to enrich. And so yeah, it just Brad, you touched the nerve on that one for me because it's just amazing to me how people are just not even seeing this and
Well,
not making noise.
and Chairman Butler, I'm glad you brought that up because I was going to ask you about, you guys have a sports book there at Foxwoods. Uh, there's all kinds of regulatory requirements when you run that sports book, I imagine. And is that done in conjunction with the state? And I'm talking in terms of, problem gambling and
Yeah.
all those types of things. You guys are, if you guys get some funny business, there's an inordinate amount of bets on a particular game and all that. I mean, I'm sure there's reporting requirements, all these kinds of
Yeah,
things.
well, and specifically with travel gaming, we have multiple layers of oversight, right? We have our own regulations and gaming commissions. We have state gaming commissions that we work with, and then obviously NIGC. And so, those layers of protection just don't exist in this new environment. And it's almost like, well, then what are all these rules for, right? I mean, do we just not care about the consumer anymore? Because that's what was told to me as I'm negotiating my sports betting, iGaming agreement with the state. Like we need to take, and of course we do, we care about the consumers, but that was one of the many things held over our head, and we have to contribute to problem gaming and focus on. And these guys get a free pass.
And
I think one of the big things here is we have to recognize what the reality is, and you have to treat Kalshi like the bad actor that they are. You know what I mean? They last week they made an announcement they're going to use AI, Grok X's AI, and then they backtracked on it. But Tariq's statement calling Elon Musk a fighter for the First Amendment and free speech tells you everything you need to know about this guy. I mean, he was chewing on prostate. You know what I mean? So you got to treat these guys like what they are. They're bad actors. These are not. This is not a normal fight. This is not going to go the way they want. I mean, we were all shocked when they filed against Nevada. You know what I mean? And then they won. You know what I mean? And Nevada backed down. So this is not a normal fight, nor can you treat it like. So you know what? These guys are coming in. They're saying we shouldn't call it prediction markets. Call it what it is: gambling. You know what I mean? And by the way, that's a big part of this that I think a lot of us have seen is that on one hand, Tariq and these guys are saying this isn't gambling, yet they're advertising on gambling. You could bet on your favorite team. You can bet on March Madness. You can bet on the Pope. You can bet on the
weather event.
California fires, which by the
Yeah.
way was Polymarket, not Kalshi. But you get the point, So don't treat these guys like good actors. Treat them like the bad actors that they are. You know what I mean? Because they're running fast and breaking things. This was an idea created in developed in an incubator, not a business school. So it's all about disruption. Treating it like anything other than what it is a disservice to all of us. You know what I mean? So call them the bad actors that they are. Go after them as the bad actors that they are, and then that's a beginning. Then we're using the same action, the language that they're using, because language is a big part of this. And that's when we go to court that this language needs to be decided. This is gambling. This isn't prediction. This isn't pork bellies and hedging your bet so that orange juice, the frost market, kills your orange juices in Florida. This is something completely different. And they're using this moment of disruption in America to take advantage of the opportunity, and we have to fight back. And anything less than a full-throated attack back is we're not doing our jobs. Sorry, had to get up.
Joe,
Let me get off my soapbox now.
Well, Joe, why do you think there's just a reticence, as Chairman Butler's saying, from the commercial side of things? I mean, I would think if you're an MGM, a Caesars, all these folks that have brick and mortar sports books, I mean, I just don't understand how they don't see that their business model is under threat. Why is there such, not very much coming from the commercial side of things?
I think it's probably some of it's the same issue that we've talked about with tribes. I think there's still a lack of awareness of the potential impact that this could have. But I also think that we are starting to see the commercial entities start to step up. And we've certainly seen that in both Nevada and New Jersey, where their respective associations have gotten involved in the cases. And frankly, I think in both of those situations, the briefs that they filed have been, frankly, very well done, and trying to present some of these arguments and explain, what the CEA actually covers and doesn't cover. But I think, to your point, Jason, it ultimately it's about awareness, that this is this is a major issue that doesn't just impact tribes. It impacts states. It impacts commercial interest. There's the broader public policy issues that were discussed in terms of responsible gaming. So there are, I guess maybe that's the good news here, is that this is not tribes having to stand by themselves. There are so many interests that are negatively impacted by this.
Well, the one thing I would add too, just from my almost 20 something years in the gaming industry and also falling victim to it myself, there's a lot of arrogance in gaming operators, and especially in some of the big commercial operators, and they just don't think it's going to impact them, right? Who is Kalshi? Who's Robin Hood? Who are these sport trader, radar, whatever the other one is, right? And then when you hear a headline like Brad had shared that, well, they just took in $600 million, that gets somebody's attention. And so I think they're just slow to warm up to the idea that this is a real threat. And look, we're all busy too. So we're in some interesting times and a lot of moving parts. And so to focus on this, I think, Victor, you may have said it earlier that, some people are taking advantage of the chaos that's going on right now. And these guys are flying under the radar until all of a sudden they're a multi-billion-dollar business and they're threatening the billions of tax dollars that are going to states and the tens of billions of dollars that are going to our economies.
And I mean, you have a board where everybody's resigning. You know what I mean? So how do you respond to that? What do you do? Welcome to any country, right?
30% of the personnel at the CFTC have, taken early buyouts.
Right, that's true.
Been reassigned, whatever the Doge cuts have done to, it impacted the CFTC as well. So you can imagine that they may be understaffed and in need of more expertise there. But Bradley, I mean, when tribes are just looking for an opportunity now to intervene, it seems like Arizona, because we do have tribes there with tribal state agreements. That might be the first place to do it, but we'll see if Kalshi sues Arizona there. What are our other options here for Indian country, that are not congressional lobbying, but more on this regulatory legal side of things?
Well, just by way of background, we'll go back in time to 2008 when we had the economic crisis. And following that, Congress made amendments to the Commodities Exchange Act to try and root out some of the types of contracts that they believe might have contributed to the economic crisis, and to put in place some regulatory controls at the CFTC to help avoid that in the future. And one of them is referred to affectionately as the special rule. And that special rule was then put into a regulation format, and it prohibits the trade of contracts that relate to, or reference terrorism, assassination, war, illegal activities under any state or federal law, or gaming. And so we have this regulation that has been in place since 2011 that, because of the way the self-certification process is, you have people, these registered entities saying, we're complying with everything. I think we contend they're not. But all the things you just listed, the cuts, the timing, the resignations, all that has made for this kind of perfect storm where they're operating in a vacuum, if you will. And unfortunately, I think that most of us think of the CFTC as, the orange juice regulators. And I'm not trying to put them down, but that's where we hear about those types of things. And so this idea that there would be sports betting happening under the guise of the CFTC's regulatory jurisdiction, uh, just seems, to be, one, questionable, but it's happening. And I think as we go through this, getting people aware of that, and then figuring out how best to get the courts to look at this issue and say, this regulation says you can't do this. Why didn't you act, CFTC? And whether that's going to come up in these actions by, for instance, Kalshi against the state regulators, or whether it's going to have to be in a more direct action involving the CFTC as a party, I think that's one of our significant questions. And I think it's going to end up ultimately having to be an action that involves the CFTC.
Yeah, and Victor, one of the things that, that's concerning, and as Chairman Butler said, we should all be up in arms and out there, shouting this to on the highest mountain, is if this stuff gets normalized, and the way it's moving so quickly, to hear college kids talking about placing bets on call sheet on various things. And this is where it catches on quick, is with the younger group that knows how to just get on their phone and do all this in a matter of seconds, open an account, put money in it. It's all sort of intuitive to them. And if this gets more normalized over time, it will be harder and harder. I think, again, there's that disconnect between agriculture and gaming that I think everybody needs to hone in on. But that's the fear of what's going on here, is that this gets normalized. Let me ask you though, Victor. We know that these types of bets are allowed, like Britain regulates it, Republic of Ireland. Those are the two that I know of, and I've read articles where American citizens flew over there to put large bets on the elections in 2016 and 2024. So, it's not like this type of stuff is unheard of, because it has been allowed in, well, again, I just know for sure Britain and Ireland. And so you got to wonder, is this something that this society is ready to do themselves? I think that's the policy question that needs to be answered before we let these guys come in, like you said, and just break things. Because I don't know what the controls are for when a coach or a player is betting on their own team under these contracts. I know that the baseball coach at University of Alabama got busted betting on his own team because the sports book and the regulators in the state of Ohio caught wind of it and raised it up the flagpole immediately. What's the mechanism for stopping that if you're doing it under the CFTC? And I doubt the CFTC can answer that question. So, that's why this is an important policy. And I think that the Senate Agricultural Committee will hold the preliminary hearing on the nominee, Brian Quintenz. And I think Chairman Butler, Indian Country works with a lot of these agricultural senators, Senator Moran in Kansas, even the senator from Arkansas, Bozeman, has been working to get the Farm Bill passed with Indian Country for several years now. So we have our allies there, and we're going to raise this for sure with the Senate Ag Committee. But again, we'll see how far that can get us and where we can go from there.
So tomorrow is going to be an interesting day. Okay. So we're going to have this call. We're finally going to get this call. It was supposed to be in person. They canceled it. So what do you guys think we're going to hear tomorrow? Are we going to hear anything, or is it going to be, they're short men. They got one arm. They're going to be swimming in a circle. What can we expect? Sorry, Rodney. What can we expect?
I think one problem is we really don't know what to expect, because there hasn't been a whole lot of information put out about the call. It was, an invitation to certain groups that had submitted comments to participate in a call with the acting chair. But it's unless others have heard differently, I don't think we know whether it's going to be interactive or whether it's just going to be make your presentation and, move on. It's just, there really isn't a lot of information, at least not that I've seen.
I agree with you on that. There hasn't been a lot of information other than an invitation. And I think when you look at the bigger picture of the impending resignations, including the acting chairs, I just don't anticipate there's going to be a whole lot. I think we have a clearing of the cupboard so that the new chair can come in and fill it how he might want to. And I may not be as positive, but I feel like this is at best a courtesy because they canceled the roundtable that was going to be out in the public, and instead we get a private call that with really a commission that's not going to be able to act on any of our concerns. And so I may be the Debbie Downer of the group on this, but I hope it's
Yeah, on that positive note, yeah.
No, I don't think it's a downer at all. It's just the reality, and we shouldn't really expect anything from these folks. And fortunately, that's sort of a trend that's going across all the federal agencies right now. When you try to have consultation with them or sit down and meet with them, understaffed, people are leaving, not sure why we're in the position we're in. Maybe wait for the next budget round and we'll get more folks in here. Those are all just kind of weird place we're in when you come in and just shake up the federal government like it's been, and people head for the doors. It's a new environment for everybody to deal with, and this Zoom meeting tomorrow is right up there with it. I think Victor ultimately, with 4 lawsuits potentially coming. I just don't know that. I think more press is bad for them. The more this gets out in the open.
Oh yeah.
It's not good optics. And
Well,
I can
you
tell you right
know
now,
what?
at least some of the senators' offices, they honed right in on the state taxes.
Yeah.
Well, we have sports betting in our state. What would that do with the taxes? Well, you're not going to collect any taxes.
Yeah.
From
And
a
Jason, it's a couple of $1 billion. And
Yeah.
states are already strapped for cash, right? And then you think about some of these really big states that are by choice not allowing sports betting or iGaming, and it doesn't matter what they want if this goes forward.
That-
I posted an article yesterday on pachanga.net talking about saying Native American tribes aren't DEI. They're not seen under this. These are government to government relationships.
Mhm.
And, I think a lot of this disruption you're seeing in the government has to be doing with that. And you've seen them reacting. Now they're pulling back when they're understanding this unique relationship. And I think this is where the angle that we have to come. And by the way, Rebecca George says, where can we find info on tomorrow's call? You know what?
Not going to.
We have NCI coming up, and then the week after we have the Washington Indian Gaming Association come up. I think these are the places that we need to get together with tribal leaders and prepare them, use every opportunity to point everybody in the same direction and give them. We can't give them really marching orders because we don't know which way to march, but you still have to be prepared. So,
That's
so
about right.
we still have to be prepared. So when we go into NCAI, we're all, this is a situation. Here's, prepare for legal battle because that's the only way that this is going. Brad brings up a really good point is that the fact that, these guys aren't going to be able to act on what they're talking about with all new commissions. So it's a courtesy call, but we don't know what they're going to say, but I'm sure it'd be professional and, and to tell us that we don't have a voice in it or something like that. I doubt if they'll be that brazen at this point, but Chairman Butler's, they've spent billions of dollars to the state of Connecticut in the last 30 years, 35 years, $7 billion, if I remember right. And
8.
8 billion. Okay, all right. What's a billion between friends?
But Victor, a lot of
yeah.
this, well, just the last point, a lot, and maybe that's why you haven't seen as much commercial outrage, is they really do look at Indian gaming as a monopoly that was granted to tribes somehow. Only the 2 tribes have gambling in Connecticut, and that's somehow, they don't understand why that is. They don't understand why the California tribes have gambling. And it's infuriating, right? Because, hey, we didn't need the state to have gambling. The IGRA limited tribal sovereignty. Tribes were doing fine on, on their reservation, what they wanted. And the federal government came in and wanted to, construct this IGRA tribal state. And so some states, obviously, if they didn't want gambling, but they had a tribe and the tribe had gambling, they said, work it out. And this is how they worked it out. It wasn't to grant tribes a monopoly. Otherwise, tribes would just do it themselves. So, they don't understand the history of this. And for them to run around and be all put out and just, frame it as some monopolistic empire out there where tribes don't have all the gambling is just total BS. And it doesn't help when you have governors like a Stitt or, back when Schwarzenegger first got in and they mischaracterized the whole thing. Well, even the original governor there in Connecticut that was just openly like going to call out the troops, the National Guard against you guys. I mean, that's how
roadblocks. He was going to put roadblocks.
Yep.
Yeah, that's how far these state governments were willing to go to prevent gambling on the reservations. So, sorry that we have, so-called monopoly, but we're sure as hell paying for it. Standard Oil never had to pay this much money for their monopoly. So, it's just a crazy misinterpretation of tribes, and to the extent that they even understand why tribes exist in this country is, a whole nother discussion. So that's what we're up against, Victor, is this, this whole wave of new thinking and just bulldozing over tribes. What you can't get in California will come around the back door and get it.
And then you wonder why I don't sleep, Jason.
Well,
you wonder why I'm awake at 4 a.m. every night. You know what I mean? Because I'm watching, man. That's what I do. And but this is nothing new for us. This is what, we've come into the fight. This is what we always do.
Yeah.
I think what we need to do is prepare for this. I think this NCAI meeting is important. One of the two questions we got it from Rebecca and Eric are how do they join the call tomorrow? Even that is a mystery.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Even that thing was a mystery. I don't have an invite. I think we don't know how it's coming in, guys. We don't have the invite yet. So even that's a mystery. Who got decided? Who got it? CNIGA got it. Western Indian Gaming, Oklahoma Indian Gaming Association didn't get it. Or Minnesota. So we don't know at this time. But we'll let you know. I'll call you, Rebecca, when I'm done. I think going into this will be interesting tomorrow. I think, we'll talk about it next week. We'll do a follow-up and let you guys know what we hear. But I think it's very important that, we prepare on the ground at the NCAI. We're going to be there. NIGA will be there with the NCAI talking about this. We'll be at Foxwoods from the 8th to the 11th. And then after that, we have the very next week, we have the Washington Indian Gaming Association. And I'll be up there for that. So hopefully we can do something. We have some conversations up there also. So Jason, where are we besides, wow, you know what I mean?
Right.
This conversation can go on for 2 hours. Very easy. Easy.
And that's why we've set aside 2 hours at Foxwoods for this and come one, come all, because it is all hands on deck and we're going to need everybody there on June 10th. So.
Yeah, again, so we don't know, are the tribalists that are invited tomorrow unknown as well? We are confident they will come out if the meeting discuss it. No, we're not confident of anything. We don't know anything. You know what I mean? So we're all playing this by ear. Hopefully I'll get an invite. I'll get to listen to it too. And we'll be back here. I know Jason will probably be on it. But we don't know yet. We haven't got the invites. So that's where we're at, So maybe they fired all the secretaries over there. They closed. Listen, they were closing emails down and stuff. The DOE, they were like, I was looking for smoke signals, So, okay, well, let's wrap this up. First of all, Chairman Butler, thank you so much. You're on the front lines in this, it directly affects you.
Well, no, look, but I can say all I want, but you have an audience, Victor. So thank you for, putting this front and center and, for allowing tribal leaders to understand what's going on. And as you noted, and Jay, you've done a million plugs. We'll see you all in a couple of weeks at Mashantucket, and we'll talk about this face to face and give you updates from tomorrow's meeting from whatever we hear.
Bradley, Joe, you can send the billable hours to Jason Giles. That'll be
Yeah.
1 billable hours. I believe you guys bill when you sleep, dream, don't you?
That's part of the strategy, Victor. You know, Kalshi and them have millions of dollars for litigation. They can sue every state in the country.
Send them the bill. I think that's what he's saying. Send them the bill. You know what I mean? So,
right.
and listen, everyone that came on, thank you for all your wonderful questions, and we appreciate it. We're all trying to figure this out as much as you are, but we're all in the same pointed in the same direction, and I think that's a good start. Bradley, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming. We'll have you back. Joe, thank you so much. Don't go anywhere. You'll be there next week. We
Thank you, guys.
appreciate everything you've done, Chairman and Jason, brother. Always great to have you, Lisa. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you guys next week. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye.